Hi, I'm Ottessa. Thank you so much, Justin, for that introduction and for inviting me here. This is really special, actually, to be invited to speak on the theme of existential despair to a bunch of kids who don't know I'm coming. That's cool. So I think what I'm going to do for you is to read from the beginning of my novel that came out almost 2 years ago now, called My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And I guess just to preface my reading, I'll say that this is the book that is about a young woman who, unhappy with her current life and psychic situation, gets the good idea that if she sleeps for long enough, her cells will have regenerated themselves the number of times it would take for them to have forgotten whatever trauma they had ever experienced. So that hopefully, after this year of sleep, she will emerge kind of renewed and fresh and like a child. And that maybe even the world will appear to her to be a different world. Please feel free to laugh. That's funny what I didn't totally process what you said about how that you teach religion not as a question of finding God or finding meaning, but something about feeling chosen or feeling lost. I feel chosen and I feel lost. I don't, and they're like two different things. Like I feel like we're all lost, but among us lost ones, I feel really fucking lucky to have been chosen for this life. And mostly it's because of my, the awesome respect I have for my ancestors and what they did. And because I saw the opportunities I was given to do what I wanted to do, which is to be a writer, and they kept coming. It was like I knew my destiny, and even if I had tried to avoid it, I wouldn't have been able to. Like, this was the only thing that was gonna keep me alive. So I feel really chosen in that way. Okay. I think that the protagonist of my book, however, does not feel so lucky. And she doesn't have a name. And the year is 2000, and we're in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. Okay. I'm just going to read from the beginning so you get a sense of what she sounds like and how she kind of gets into what she gets into. Whenever I woke up, night or day, I'd shuffle through the bright marble foyer of my building and go up the block and around the corner where there was a bodega that never closed. I'd get 2 large coffees with cream and 6 sugars each, chug the first one in the elevator on the way back up to my apartment, then sip the second one slowly while I watched movies and ate animal crackers and took trazodone and Ambien and Nembutal until I fell asleep again. I lost track of time in this way. Days passed, weeks, a few months went by. When I thought of it, I ordered delivery from the Thai restaurant across the street or a tuna salad platter from the diner on First Avenue. I'd wake up to find voice messages on my cell phone from salons or spas confirming appointments I'd booked in my sleep. I always called back to cancel, which I hated doing because I hated talking to people. Early on in this phase, I had my dirty laundry picked up and clean laundry delivered once a week. It was a comfort for me to hear the torn plastic bags rustle in the draft from the living room windows. I liked catching whiffs of the fresh laundry smell while I dozed on the sofa. But after a while, it was too much trouble to gather up all the dirty clothes and stuff them in the laundry bag, and the sound of my own washer and dryer interfered with my sleep. So I just threw away my dirty underpants. All the old pairs reminded me of Trevor, anyway. Trevor's an ex-boyfriend, in case that wasn't obvious. For a while, tacky lingerie from Victoria's Secret kept showing up in the mail, frilly fuchsia and lime green thongs and teddies and baby doll nightgowns, each sealed in a clear plastic baggie. I stuffed the little baggies into the closet and went commando. An occasional package from Barney's or Saks provided me with men's pajamas or other things I couldn't remember ordering: cashmere socks, graphic t-shirts, designer jeans. I took a shower once a week at most. I stopped tweezing, stopped bleaching, stopped waxing, stopped brushing my hair, no moisturizing or exfoliating, no shaving. I left the apartment infrequently. I'd already paid a year of property taxes on my apartment and on my dead parents' old house upstate. Rent money from the tenants in that house showed up in my checking account by direct deposit every month. Unemployment was rolling in as long as I made the weekly call into the automated service and pressed 1 for yes when the robot asked if I'd made a sincere effort to find a job. That was enough to cover the co-payments on all my prescriptions and whatever I picked up at the bodega. Plus, I had investments. My dead father's financial advisor kept track of all that and sent me quarterly statements that I never read. I had plenty of money in my savings account, too, enough to live on for a few years as long as I didn't do anything spectacular. On top of all this, I had a high credit limit on my Visa card. I wasn't worried about money. I had started hibernating as best I could in mid-June of 2000. I was 24 years old. I watched summer die and autumn turn cold and gray through a broken slat in the blinds. My muscles withered, the sheets on my bed yellowed, although I usually fell asleep in front of the television on the sofa, which was from Pottery Barn and striped blue and white and sagging and covered in coffee and sweat stains. I didn't do much in my waking hours besides watch movies. I couldn't stand to watch regular television. Especially at the beginning, TV aroused too much in me, and I'd get compulsive about the remote, clicking around, scoffing at everything, and agitating myself. I couldn't handle it. The only news I could read were the sensational headlines on the local daily papers at the bodega. I'd quickly glance at them as I paid for my coffees. Bush versus Gore for president. Somebody important died, a child was kidnapped, a senator stole money, a famous athlete cheated on his pregnant wife. Things were happening in New York City, they always are, but none of it affected me. This was the beauty of sleep. Reality detached itself and appeared in my mind as casually as a movie or a dream. It was easy to ignore things that didn't concern me. Subway workers went on strike. A hurricane came and went. It didn't matter. Extraterrestrials could have invaded. Locusts could have swarmed. And I would have noted it, but I wouldn't have worried. When I needed more pills, I ventured out to the Rite Aid 3 blocks away. That was always a painful passage. Walking up First Avenue, everything made me cringe. I was like a baby being born. The air hurt, the light hurt, the details of the world seemed garish and hostile. I relied on alcohol only on the days of these excursions, a shot of vodka before I went out and walked past all the little bistros and cafes and shops I'd frequented when I was out there, pretending to live a life. Otherwise, I tried to limit myself to a 1-block radius around my apartment. So then she's really into the bodega. So she goes in and describes a little bit more about the bodega and the guys that work there. And she, like, you know, you see her buy a Lucy, which I don't think people do anymore. Buy a Lucy. They do? Okay. All right, so we just get her more habitual life description. And then she says, Riva would show up at the apartment with a bottle of wine from time to time and insist on keeping me company. Her mother was dying of cancer. That, among many other things, made me not want to see her. You forgot I was coming over? Riva would ask, pushing her way past me into the living room and flipping on the lights. We talked last night, remember? I like to call Riva just as the Ambien was kicking in, or the Sulfaton, or whatever. According to her, I only ever wanted to talk about Harrison Ford or Whoopi Goldberg, which she said was fine. Last night you recounted the entire plot of Frantic, and you did the scene where they're driving in the car with the cocaine, and you went on and on, Riva said. Emmanuelle Seigner is amazing in that movie, I said. That's exactly what you said last night. I was both relieved and irritated when Riva showed up, the way you'd feel if someone interrupted you in the middle of suicide. Not that what I was doing was suicide. In fact, it was the opposite of suicide. My hibernation was self-preservational. I thought that it was going to save my life. Now get in the shower, Riva would say, heading into the kitchen. I'll take out the trash. I loved Riva, but I didn't like her anymore. We'd been friends since college, long enough that all we had left in common was our history together, a complex circuit of resentment, memory, jealousy, denial, and a few dresses I'd let Riva borrow, which she'd promised to dry clean in return, but never did. She worked as an executive assistant for an insurance brokerage firm in Midtown. She was an only child, a gym rat, had a blotchy red birthmark on her neck in the shape of Florida, a gum-chewing habit that gave her TMJ and breath that reeked of cinnamon and green apple candy. She liked to come over to my place, clear a space for herself on the armchair, comment on the state of the apartment, say I looked like I'd lost more weight, and complain about work, all while refilling her wine glass after every sip. People don't understand what it's like for me, she said. They take it for granted that I'm always going to be cheerful. Meanwhile, these assholes think they can go around treating everyone below them like shit, and I'm supposed to giggle and look cute and send their faxes? Fuck them. Let them all go bald and burn in hell. That's Riva talking. Riva was having an affair with her boss, Ken, a middle-aged man with a wife and child. She was open about her obsession with him, but she tried to hide that they were sexually involved. She once showed me a picture of him in a company brochure. Tall, big shoulders, white button-down shirt, blue tie, face so nondescript, so boring, he may as well have been molded out of plastic. Riva had a thing for older men, as did I. Men our age, Riva said, were too corny, too affectionate, too needy. I could understand her disgust, but I'd never met a man like that. All the men I'd ever been with, young as well as old, had been detached and unfriendly. You're a cold fish, that's why, Riva said. Like attracts like. As a friend, Riva was indeed corny and affectionate and needy, but she was also very secretive and occasionally very patronizing. She couldn't or simply wouldn't understand why I wanted to sleep all the time, and she was always rubbing my nose in her moral high ground and telling me to face the music about whatever bad habit I'd been stuck on at the time. The summer I started sleeping, Riva admonished me for squandering my bikini body. Smoking kills, she said. You should get out more. Are you getting enough protein in your diet? Etc. I'm not a baby, Riva. I'm just worried about you because I care, because I love you, she'd say. Since we'd met junior year, Riva could never soberly admit to any desire that was remotely uncouth. But she wasn't perfect. She's no white lily, as my mother would have said. I'd known for years that Riva was bulimic. I knew she masturbated with an electric neck massager because she was too embarrassed to buy a proper vibrator from a sex shop. I knew she was deep in debt from college and years of maxed out credit cards, and that she shoplifted testers from the beauty section of the health food store near her apartment on the Upper West Side. I'd seen the tester stickers on various items in the huge bag of makeup she carried around wherever she went. She was a slave to vanity and status, which was not unusual in a place like Manhattan, but I found her desperation especially irritating. It made it hard for me to respect her intelligence. She was so obsessed with brand names, conformity, fitting in. She made regular trips down to Chinatown for the latest knockoff designer handbags. She'd given me a Dooney and Burke wallet for Christmas once. She got us matching fake Coach key rings. Ironically, her desire to be classy had always been the déclassé thorn in her side. Studied grace is not grace, I once tried to explain. Charm is not a hairstyle. You either have it or you don't. The more you try to be fashionable, the tackier you'll look. Nothing hurt Riva more than effortless beauty like mine. When we'd watched Before Sunrise on video one day, she'd said, "Did you know Julie Delpy's a feminist? I wonder if that's why she's not skinnier." No way they'd cast her in this role if she were American. See how soft her arms are? Nobody here tolerates arm flab. Arm flab is a killer. It's like the SATs. You don't even exist if you're below 1400. But that's the old SATs. I think they changed the scoring now. Does it make you happy that Julie Delpy has arm flab? I'd asked her. No, Riva said after some consideration. Happiness is not what I'd call it. More like satisfaction. Okay, so that's Riva, who ends up playing a pretty important role in the book, despite the protagonist just like never really wanting her to come over. So I'm going to skip to just a couple pages ahead where the protagonist first encounters another major character in the book named Dr. Tuttle, who is, as you can imagine, important because she's the one providing the drugs that will allow our sleeper person to be asleep all the time. Okay, so I'll read this section and then maybe one more. We'll see. Okay. I can't point to any one event that resulted in my decision to go into hibernation. Initially, I just wanted some downers to drown out my thoughts and judgments, since the constant barrage made it hard not to hate everyone and everything. I thought life would be more tolerable if my brain were slower to condemn the world around me. I started seeing Dr. Tuttle in January 2000. It started off very innocently. I was plagued with misery, anxiety, a wish to escape the prison of my mind and body. Dr. Tuttle confirmed that this was nothing unusual. She was not a good doctor. I had found her name in the phone book. "You've caught me at a good moment," she said the first time I called. "I just finished rinsing the dishes." "Where did you find my number?" "In the yellow pages." I like to think that I'd picked Dr. Tuttle at random, that there was something fated about our relationship, divine in some way. But in truth, she'd been the only psychiatrist to answer the phone at 11 at night on a Tuesday. I'd left a dozen messages on answering machines by the time Dr. Tuttle picked up. The biggest threats to brains nowadays are all the microwave ovens, Dr. Tuttle explained on the phone that night. Microwaves, radio waves, now there are cell phone towers blasting us with who knows what kind of frequencies. But that's not my science. I deal in treating mental illness. "Do you work for the police?" she asked me. "No, I work for an art dealer at a gallery in Chelsea," I said. "Are you FBI?" "No." "CIA?" "No. Why?" "I just have to ask these questions. Are you DEA, FDA, NICB, NHCAA?" Are you a private investigator hired by a governmental entity? Do you work for a medical insurance company? Are you a drug dealer, drug addict? Are you a clinician, a med student, getting pills for an abusive boyfriend or employer? NASA? I think I have insomnia. That's my main issue, which was a lie. You're probably addicted to caffeine too, am I right? I don't know. You better keep drinking that coffee. If you quit now, you'll just go crazy. Real insomniacs suffer hallucinations and lost time and usually have poor memory. It can make life very confusing. Does that sound like you? Sometimes I feel dead, I told her, and I hate everybody. Does that count? Oh, that counts. That certainly counts. I'm sure I can help you. So after a little more discussion, they make arrangements for a visit. So Dr. Tuttle told me to come in the next day at 9 a.m. Her home office was in an apartment building on 13th Street near Union Square. The waiting room was a dark wood-paneled parlor full of fake Victorian furniture, cat toys, pots of potpourri, purple candles, wreaths of dead purple flowers, and stacks of old National Geographic magazines. The bathroom was crowded with fake plants and peacock feathers. On the sink, next to a huge bar of cracked lilac soap, was a wooden bowl of peanuts. That baffled me. She hid all her personal toiletries in a large wicker basket in the cabinet under the sink. She used several antifungal powders, a prescription steroid cream, shampoo, and soap and lotions that smelled like lavender and violet, fennel toothpaste. Her mouthwash was prescription. When I tried it, it tasted like the ocean. The first time I met Dr. Tuttle, she wore a foam neck brace because of a taxi accident and was holding an obese tabby whom she introduced as my eldest. She pointed out the tiny yellow envelopes in the waiting room. When you come in, write your name on an envelope and fold your check inside. Payments go in here, she said, knocking on the wooden box on the desk in her office. It was the kind of box they have in churches for accepting donations for candles. The fainting couch in her office was covered in cat fur and piled on one end with little antique dolls with chipped porcelain faces. On her desk were half-eaten granola bars and stacked Tupperware containers of grapes and cut-up melon, a mammoth old computer, more National Geographic magazines. "What brings you here?" she asked. "Depression?" She'd already pulled out her prescription pad. My plan was to lie. I'd given it careful consideration. I told her I'd been having trouble sleeping for the past 6 months, and then complained of despair and nervousness in social situations. But as I was reciting my practice speech, I realized it was somewhat true. I wasn't an insomniac, but I was miserable. Complaining to Dr. Tuttle was strangely liberating. "I want downers, that much I know," I said frankly. "And I want something that'll put a damper on my need for company. I'm at the end of my rope with that," I said. "I'm an orphan on top of it all. I probably have PTSD. My mother killed herself." "How?" Dr. Tuttle asked. "Slit her wrists," I lied. "Good to know." Her hair was red and frizzy. The foam brace she wore around her neck had what looked like coffee and food stains on it, and it squished the skin on her neck up toward her chin. Her face was like a bloodhound's, folded and drooping, her sunken eyes hidden under very small wire-framed glasses with Coke bottle lenses. I never got a good look at Dr. Tuttle's eyes, but I suspect that they were crazy eyes, black and shiny, like a crow's. The pen she used was long and purple and had a purple feather at the end of it. "Both my parents died when I was in college," I went on, "just a few years ago." She seemed to study me for a moment, her expression blank and breathless. Then she turned back to her little prescription pad. "I'm very good with insurance companies," she said matter-of-factly. "I know how to play into all their little games." "Are you sleeping at all?" Barely, I said. Any dreams? Only nightmares. I figured. Sleep is key. Most people need upwards of 14 hours or so. The modern age has forced us to live unnatural lives. Busy, busy, busy. Go, go, go. You probably work too much. She scribbled for a while on her pad. Mirth, Dr. Tuttle said. I like it better than joy. Happiness isn't a word I like to use in here. It's very arresting, happiness. You should know that I'm someone who appreciates the subtleties of human experience. Being well rested is a precondition, of course. But do you know what mirth means? M-I-R-T-H? Yeah, like the House of Mirth, I said. A sad story, said Dr. Tuttle. I haven't read it, I said. Better you don't. I read The Age of Innocence. Oh, so you're educated. I went to Columbia. That's good for me to know, but not much use to you in your condition. Education is directly proportional to anxiety, as you've probably learned having gone to Columbia. How's your food intake? Is it steady? Any dietary restrictions? When you walked in here, I thought of Faye Dunaway and Farrah Fawcett. Any relation? I'd say you're, 20 pounds underweight? I think my appetite would come back if I could just sleep, I said. It was a lie. I was already sleeping upwards of 12 hours, from 8 to 8. I was hoping to get pills to help me sleep straight through the weekends. Daily meditation has been shown to cure insomnia in rats, said Dr. Tuttle. I'm not a religious person, but you could try visiting a church or synagogue to ask for advice on inner peace. The Quakers seem like reasonable people. But be wary of cults. They're often just traps to enslave young women. Are you sexually active? Not really, I told her. Do you live near any nuclear plants? Any high voltage equipment? I live on the Upper East Side. Take the subway? At that point, I still took the subway each day to work. A lot of psychic diseases get passed around in confined public spaces. I sense your mind is too porous. Do you have any hobbies? I watch movies. That's a fun one. How'd they get the rats to meditate? I asked her. You've seen rodents. You've seen rodents breed in captivity. The parents eat their babies. Now, we can't demonize them. They do it out of compassion for the good of the species. Any allergies? No. With that, Dr. Tuttle put her pen down and stared off into space, deep in thought, it seemed. Some rats, she said after a while, probably deserve to be demonized. Certain individual rats. She picked her pen back up with a flourish of the purple feather. The moment we start making generalizations, we give up our right to self-govern. I hope you follow me. Rats are very loyal to the planet. Try these, she said, handing me a sheath of prescriptions. So that's kind of how it begins. I'm wondering if there's another section I could read that would kind of, I don't know, devastate you. Maybe I'll actually read a little bit from the end. So when I was writing this book, I really didn't know where the experiment would take my character, and I weirdly found myself in Paris at one point, both physically and in the book, and wrote 200 pages of the story where she encounters this I don't know, kind of like a witch doctor, and has done this self-enslavement vacation, sex vacation, It's really weird. Anyway, so that didn't work. But aspects of that like kind of informed the way that the book went. And if you read the book, you might see that. But anyway, what we find out about her is that she has this kind of like shitty job working in an art gallery in Chelsea, and that actually ends up being pivotal to her quote unquote success with Sleep in the end, because it involves an artist that she meets at the gallery. So this question of like art and its function in the human experience versus its value in an industry that has nothing to do really with that human experience is like one of the metaphors for how the book talks about reality, I guess, or lack of a better word. So I wrote this scene at the very end of the book, like where she has gone through her hibernation and is kind of rediscovering the world. And she spends a lot of time just like in the park and going to Goodwill and like sniffing things, because she is kind of new, reborn, and naive in a new way. But then she has this one day that she goes to the museum. And this really is, I guess, totally, I mean, I think this will seem very different from the beginning of the book, but just to give you an idea of like where the book gets to. And I don't think this is a spoiler. Is that the word? I don't think it's a spoiler. Do you? I found my way into the Met one afternoon in early September. I guess I wanted to see what other people had done with their lives. People who had made art alone, who had stared long and hard at bowls of fruit. I wondered if they'd watched the grapes wither and shrivel up, if they'd had to go to the market to replace them, and if, before they threw this shriveled strand of grapes away, they'd eaten a few. I hoped that they'd had some respect for the stuff they were immortalizing. Maybe, I thought, once the light had faded for the day, they dropped the rotted fruit out an open window, hoping it would save the life of a starving beggar passing below on the street. Then I imagined the beggar, a monster with worms crawling through his matted hair, the tattered rags on his body fluttering like the wings of a bird, his eyes ablaze with desperation, his heart a caged animal begging for slaughter, hands cupped in perpetual prayer as the townspeople milled around the city square. Picasso was right to start painting the dreary and dejected, the blues. He looked out the window at his own misery. I could respect that. But these painters of fruit thought only of their own mortality, as though the beauty of their work would somehow soothe their fear of death. There they all were, hanging feckless and candid and meaningless, paintings of things, objects, the paintings themselves just things, objects, withering toward their own inevitable demise. I got the feeling that if I moved the frames to the side, I'd see the artists watching me, as though through a two-way mirror, cracking their arthritic knuckles and rubbing their stubbled chins, wondering what I was wondering about them, if I saw their brilliance or if their lives had been pointless, if only God could judge them after all. Did they want more? Was there more genius to be wrung out of the turpentine rags at their feet? Could they have painted better? Could they have painted more generously, more clearly? Could they have dropped more fruit from their open windows? Did they know that glory was mundane? Did they wish they'd crushed those withered grapes between their fingers and spent their days walking through fields of grass, or being in love, or confessing their delusions to a priest, or starving like the hungry souls they were, begging for alms in the city square with some honesty for once? Maybe they'd lived wrongly. Their greatness might have poisoned them. Did they wonder about things like that? Maybe they couldn't sleep at night. Were they plagued by nightmares? Maybe they understood, in fact, that beauty and meaning had nothing to do with one another. Maybe they lived as real artists, knowing all along that there were no pearly gates. Neither creation nor sacrifice could lead a person to heaven. Or maybe not. Maybe in the morning they were aloof and happy to distract themselves with their brushes and oils, to mix their colors and smoke their pipes and go back to their fresh, still lifes without having to swat away any more flies. "Step back, please," I heard a guard say. I was too close to the painting. "Step away." The notion of my future suddenly snapped into focus. It didn't exist yet. I was making it, standing there, breathing, fixing the air around my body with stillness, trying to capture something, a thought, I guess, as though such a thing were possible, as though I believed in the delusion described in those paintings, that time could be contained, held captive. I didn't know what was true, so I did not step back. Instead, I put my hand out. I touched the frame of the painting. And then I placed my whole palm on the dry, rumbling surface of the canvas, simply to prove to myself that there was no God stalking my soul. Time was not immemorial. Things were just things. "Ma'am," the guard yelled, and then there were hands gripping my shoulders, pulling me to the side. But that was all that happened. "Sorry, I got dizzy," I explained. That was it. I was free. So I think I'll just end there, and we can talk. Yeah, I'll take questions. Thank you.
There's a microphone around. I know there's a question up here, two up here.
Where?
Hi, thank you so much. Your work is incredible. I just wanted to know if you had any thoughts or reflections on what our protagonist in the novel feels about her period. So she's trying to get through this whole year and have it sort of pass in a evaporate or some sort. But then there's this marker of time that she's probably going to contend with on a regular sort of basis. So how might she feel about her period?
I think that, I'm not sure if maybe this got cut from the book, but she stopped getting her period. So she didn't, at one point she mentions finding underwear stained, old stained underwear, and I think maybe that's where she said that she stopped getting her period. And to me, that made perfect sense that she would stop menstruating. That kind of cycle in her body would stop also. And I'm not sure, when an animal is in hibernation, they're not in heat, right? Are they fertile? I don't know. She definitely was not menstruating. It's a weird question. Especially as the first question. I hope you don't have anything in mind later.
There was a piece in the New Yorker article about
Oh, about menstruation? Oh, okay. Okay, no, it's cool. I'm just teasing you. Okay.
Thank you. I had a question about Dr. Tuttle and the rats.
Yeah.
In the excerpt that you read, the way that Dr. Tuttle kind of diverges on this weird monologue about the rats almost completely ignoring what the main character asks is it's a very particular kind of rhythm. So I was wondering, I guess when you were creating that character, when you were putting together Dr. Tuttle, what in her mind would kind of have her diverge on this way of thinking that sort of departs from reality? How do you write something like that?
Did you read the whole book?
No, I haven't read it yet.
I wanted Dr. Tuttle. Okay, so we're reading this book for the main character's transformation, right? But it was interesting to me to imagine Dr. Tuttle's transformation through the year as well. and not necessarily having anything to do with the protagonist, but I saw her as like a real person. I mean, even though she's very much like based in satire and comedy, like she is the comic element, which felt for me necessary when dealing with something that's actually so dark, so dangerous, that is killing. It's like basically a genocide here. The prescription drug abuse is, I take that really seriously. I lost a member of my family to that. Like, so that kind of horror, I knew I needed. This couldn't be like, she couldn't be Gollum. Like, I needed her to be funny. And I was interested in how she might develop over the course of the novel. And if you read on, you'll see that she herself is kind of moving away from, like, psychotropic medications and more into maybe what you could call, like healing. But but when she gets into healing, it's also dealt with in the same satirical fashion where, she says at one point, like, the sleeper comes into her office and she has this like massage table and she's like, what are you doing with this massage table? And Dr. Tuttle says that she's using it. I can't remember exactly. It was like something about like magnetic surgery, So she's got her own curiosity and so I do think she's the type of person to be, have maybe like a subterranean network of people interested in psychiatry, like alternative psychiatry. So I would think she would read studies. Later, when she introduces the protagonist to Infirmiderol, which is the drug that really pushes the sleeper into like a hibernative journey, she says about it that she infers that she's familiar with the makers in Switzerland. So she seems to have her, she has some kind of network and her own curiosity. Does that answer your question?
I guess my question was, like, what is that curiosity? Because obviously she's, like, very satirical, but she is, like, 100% behind everything she's saying. So I guess, like, how do you, when you're writing a character that is satirical, how do you make them take themselves seriously, basically?
You just do it. I mean, I think the funniest people in life are the people who take themselves so seriously, right?
That's true.
So, I mean, as a writer, you just like what I would tell myself as the writer, stay consistent and keep leaning forward. Every time we see the character, go deeper, go further with it to where it's almost unbelievable, That would be my like writing advice for a satirical character. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Hi, Ottessa.
Hi.
My name is Patience, and actually, you gave me really good advice at your forum about California Dreaming at the New Yorker Festival.
Oh my God, I remember you.
Yes!
You were like, people are telling me I can't write about Kansas.
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Close enough.
Right.
Good.
I was
Yes.
like, just fucking write it.
Yes. And I am. So
That's
thank you.
great. It's nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. So my question for you is that how do you like convince yourself and how do you stick with the ideas that you have for writing? Like how do you convince yourself that what you're writing is worth it? Because I think a lot of your stuff very much is, and I wonder if there's been like a time where you had to confront something where you're like, I don't think that this is worth writing down. And then from then, how do you navigate what is necessary for what you want and what is necessary for the story?
Good questions. The question of whether it's worth it or not, the only way I can answer that is maybe not what you want me to say, but when I mean,
It's okay.
like, if something is worth it for me, I know that it's going to teach me something. So, like, I get a lot of ideas, and I'd say like 50% of my ideas are from me, and 50% of the ideas are people being like, "Hey, will you do this?" And I usually have to say no, unless it's worth it. And the criteria for that is like, is this divine intervention being like, hey, the thing that you would have never considered is coming at you because this is the challenge that's going to make you grow in the way that you need to in order to do X mystery thing in the future. And the way that I can identify that the challenge is worth it is just like totally how I feel. I mean, there isn't any, like, hopefully I don't want to repeat myself too much, right? If I'm going to go over some area that feels familiar, am I doing it in a new way? Do I feel inspired about it? Does it scare me? Like, usually, like, a challenge should feel scary if it's going to feel like, oh, I'm going to have to step up, you know? I'm going to have to dig deeper here. So there's that. What was the second part of your question?
And from then, how do you navigate what is necessary for what you want and what is necessary for the story?
Mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways, I wonder, I'm going to say this and I'm not sure if it's true, but is writing, is the correct writing when what you want for the story and what is good for the story are in alignment? You know? Like, sometimes I feel like mostly what I'm trying to do is get out of the way. Because the story, I see the story as it already exists in its ideal form in the future. I'm here as an agent to somehow have it be created by me. But it isn't me. It isn't me, and if I start judging what it wants to be, I'm gonna destroy it, and I'm gonna feel stupid when I do that. You know, like when you step on a budding rose. You know, like you're like that somebody you love gave you. You know, like oops. I don't know. Like I'm just gonna feel bad. It's gonna have. I'm going to be repelled by doing that. So what I try to do, I mean, you know, the way that I think is like in terms of what is the gift and what is the work, you know? It's like when like what makes a successful person, there's a certain amount of talent and a certain amount of effort, right? So if I'm gifted with a character that has like appeared to me talking and the character's talking to me, like I need to work to understand what she's saying and what the words really are. Like I have to listen really, really closely. So it isn't really about what I want. What I want is inevitably going to come through. Like that's like it's like how do you know when you wake up you're still gonna look like you? Like what do you do in order to keep looking like you? Nothing. It's just intrinsic to who you are. So just do the thing for the story. It's going to be you anyway, you know? Don't try to impose yourself on it, because then it's just going to get embarrassing. And you'll feel embarrassed. I mean, at least that's my experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, personal question. and you can answer it however you want, obviously. Like, are you in the mental state of your characters when you're writing your characters, and how do you negotiate the, like, you're writing a character, there's some amount of empathetic attachment to that thing, but to feel it too much, at least in my view, also makes it really hard to write.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance that? What are you doing?
Have you ever learned anything about method acting?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think the best comparison I can make is like that. I used to write in front of a mirror by accident. Like I just had a mirror at a table, and I put my computer. I had a desktop then there, so it was just like whenever I was writing, I could see a mirror, and I noticed that I was writing McGlue, which was my first book, and I noticed that when I was writing, I would it was doing this, And then I would be sit back thinking and be okay, what happens next? And I'd be and it kind of just acting it out gesturally. So it's not so much my mind is now possessed by my character, but I'm trying. That's part of the effort, I'm trying to understand them in a more physical way. Yeah.
That makes sense. None of it is psychologically damaging.
No, okay, so that's the on a daily basis. On a broader note, when you are writing a long-term project, like a novel, you become so annoying to the people around you because you start seeing everything as a projection of what your novel is. So I was very single when I wrote this book. And I felt like I was going crazy. I did. I felt like I was going crazy. I developed insomnia the minute the book was finished. And then I was Ambien. I was is this really happening to me? Yeah. So I think after this book was done, I when it came out, I remember giving a couple of interviews, and people were like, "What are you going to do next?" And I was I don't know, but I'm interested in if I say okay, I'm going to have some agency about this, how much choice do I actually have? If I say I want to write my next book about somebody who just is super happy all the time, am I just going to have the best couple of years of my life? So I tried to keep that in mind, writing the book that I'm currently working on, and it just instantly devolved into somebody who was very, very tortured and who's actually dead, is telling the story from the other side. So I don't know how much agency. I don't know if you can control it. Yeah.
I know you got to meet Whoopi Goldberg and interview her, and I know she plays a large role in the consumption of film through the story and what the protagonist watches mostly. And I'm wondering how you thought about what she was watching and why she was watching what she was watching.
Well, a lot of it was informed by my own experience. I'm a child of the 80s. My mother was kind of like a yard sale hoarder. Our basement was full of VHS videos, and that's kind of how I grew into being someone who falls in love with narrative and characters. So by watching movies from the 80s, and Whoopi Goldberg always really stood out. Just a totally different resonance as an actor, as a comedian, just her face, everything about her. So I wanted the character. I wanted the character to have that kind of unlikely or unexpected hero, because it was going to make me like her more, actually. Like, I think maybe that was a moment where, like, I asserted myself. But then I felt like it worked out. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you think it would have been possible for the protagonist to overcome that year without her connections to the people at the bodega, or her connection to the doctor, or to Riva? Was there something about those relationships that made it possible for her to fathom wanting to come out of that year? Because it's very hard for me to fathom the idea of being away for a year, not needed or not being needed.
Yeah. There's this documentary that I saw about this like middle-aged woman in, I think it was in Massachusetts, who kind of wandered away from her home and lived in this abandoned house for a really long time. And she kept a journal. She had a paranoia that people were out to get her. I mean, she was probably suffering from a mental illness. But she would go out at night when no one could see her and pick apples from this like abandoned apple orchard and hoarded them in the dining room. And she lived off of apples and rainwater. I mean, and starved to death. Died, like, completely alone. She could have left at any time. Like, there were neighbors across the street with electricity, you know? I don't know why I think of that when you ask me that question, but maybe it is just to say, like, yeah, I think those people in her life are part of her survival. Because, I mean, we haven't spoken that much about it tonight, but she is, like, actually an orphan. She lost her father to cancer, and then her mother basically OD'd on the same kind of drugs she's taking and mixed with alcohol. And that's a terrifying position to be in when you have nobody. And I think that, you know, that's probably why we care about the guys in the bodega, and why she keeps Riva around even though she can't stand her, and why she keeps going to back to her stupid ex-boyfriend who doesn't really respect her. I mean, it's really hard to live alone. And in the end, I mean, when her project really culminates toward the end of the book, she isn't actually alone. I mean, there's the artist witnessing her. And I thought, yeah, I couldn't imagine the book in another way.
We have time for just one or two more.
Hi. I have almost the opposite question, but all of the like disdain that she feels for the people in her life, I think, are like what like initially attract people to this book. Like the early pages where we're just hit with that disaffection. I mean, people read that and they keep reading for a reason. And I think that that's because that's, you know, an identifiable experience. And the further you get into the book, the more distance you feel from the narrator, at least I did. But you want to, like, see her through, like, where that, you know, alienation led her when she leaned into it. And then, like, when she comes out of it, there is, you know, some newfound ability to cope. I guess the question is, like, do you think, like, leaning into that alienation is also part of, like, what helped her come out of it?
Yes. Perhaps. Being disdainful and hating everybody is a weirdly attractive quality when you're dealing with a beautiful young woman. It's very seductive. And partly I think it works in narrative because if you're alone, sitting there reading it. She's like, I hate everybody, but I'm speaking directly to you. You start to feel special, like you're somehow privy to this internal monologue and the effort she's putting in to describe herself to you. She sells herself off the bat, you know? It's interesting that, like, the further along, the more distance you felt from the narrator, and that she does lean into the isolation. Yeah, she goes far out. She goes far out and comes out on the other side, which would suggest that leaning into it was productive. But where does she end up in the end? Like, where does she end? She ends up on the floor in front of the TV. Oh my God. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that question is actually the question. If it's like, you know, could the Unabomber have been so successful if he'd had a roommate? No. But she's not the Unabomber. Yeah.
One more in the back.
Hi. So
Hi.
after you talk about your creative process, I got curious. Like, how did you learn to hear the voices of your characters? Like, along your journey as a writer, like, your creative process had always these, like, almost mystical, like, character, or or you had a specific event in your life that marked your transition, like, to develop this confidence in the characters that come to you. I don't know if it makes sense.
Well, I think the reason it really started was I think that I have like a slight handicap that I felt really aware of when I was in kindergarten and first grade. Like before I knew how to represent words on visually, I had a really hard time understanding what anyone was saying. Like I could hear them, but I didn't know what they were saying. And once I started to write and learn how to read and write, I developed this system where when someone was talking, I would see their voice being written in my mind. It's kind of like a synesthesia thing. And that's just how, that just became the way that I understood language. That it was a voice that I'm hearing narrated, but the words are in my head. And so I kind of, that's where that was my ground zero for writing. And it makes sense to me that I am more interested in voice-driven narrative because of that, you know?
I'd like us all to thank Ottessa Moshfegh for coming tonight.
Thank you so much.
Books for sale in the back. And thank you again. And if you would like your book signed, just